Good morning and welcome to Travels with Monkey Boy. Today we are on day three of our trip to Nepal in 1998, I think it was, April 1998. National Angry Day. Seemed a bit absurd to be leaving at 6 in the morning to drive the 15 minutes to the domestic airport to catch our 11 a.m. flight. But the Mala Tours people told us that it would be dangerous to leave later. This was the day of the annual nationwide strike. No one really seems to know what the strike was about, but they all knew that no one went to work and any cars seen in the streets would be stoned and possibly set on fire. Kind of a national holiday of hostility. It would have all seemed a lark, except that we heard that Pokhora, the city we were flying to, the night before, the angry people had set off a couple of bombs. We all rationalized it by the fact that we weren't going to be in Pokhora, just walking around it. Our van to the airport was outfitted with a big sign, tourists. And while I was initially comforted by it, it occurred to me that if a Nepalese killed a Nepalese on National Angry Day, it makes the local news. If a Nepalese firebombs a tourist bus, well, that's CNN. In any case, we made it to the airport safely, and I can proudly say that if you're looking for good oatmeal, you can't do much better than the oatmeal in the Kathmandu domestic airport. Now, those of you that are following the story may question the wisdom of having a huge bowl of oatmeal after a night of pizza gorging and before 3 days of hiking and living in tents, miles from the nearest toilet. But I've never been a live for today kind of a guy. Insert ominous music here. Did I mention how nice the domestic service was? They had beautiful new jets made by Raytheon. The flight to Pokhora was only 20 minutes, but they still managed to get around and serve us juice and peanuts. And the view of the Annapurna Mountains was at least as spectacular as the ones we saw the previous day of the Himalayas. The Annapurnas, by the way, are the Western Himalayas, often called the baby or wimpy Himalayas. Sure, they were 20 to 25,000 feet, but in Nepal, if you aren't 5 miles up, you're nothing. At the airport, we were greeted by a bunch of riot police, but no trucking company. Here, the people are serious people. The police and army are Gurkhas. The Gurkhas are the Spartans of Nepal. They are kind of a fraternity of tough soldiers, a heritage passed down from family to family. They have fought in a number of wars with the British and the Indians and are renowned for their fierceness. As we were waiting for the trucking company, we took up a conversation with the Gurkhas, making sure we flattered them on their worldwide fame. They were all sitting in a kind of iron car. We asked them about Angry Day. They said it was no big deal and there would be no real incidents. I asked them about the two bombings from the previous night. They all laughed and said that what was reported as bombs were in fact more like firecrackers. I mentioned that the paper said someone had died, and the Gurkhas answered that people were always dying and that it was no big deal. When we mentioned how Angry Day was disrupting our hike and told them that we would have to hike the 5 miles to our starting point, they assured us that they would gladly give us a ride to the start. The commander even gave us a card with his phone number on it. Soon after, the Gurkha's iron car went speeding off. Another half hour elapsed when at last our guides showed up. They were led by a cheerful, smiling Tibetan whose name I never could understand. We told them of our good fortune and how the Gurkhas were going to deliver us to the drop-off site. Our guides all had a good laugh at that, but we insisted it was true. After a few phone calls, we picked up our packs and began the long, trudging hike to our starting point. Of all our hiking, all the days of all our hiking, this day was the ugliest. We had to hike several hours through the suburbs of Pokhora. Because it was Angry Day, we had the roads to ourselves. All the businesses were closed, there were no cars in the street, and mostly you had a bunch of poor people muddling around looking for something to do. As the Nepalese seemed quite amiable people, you didn't see much anger. Actually, you didn't see much of anything at all. Imagine hiking through the south side of Chicago when all the businesses were closed, no cars in the streets, and people were just standing around talking. Now take away the booze, drugs, and guns, and add a few cows walking around in the middle of the streets, and you have pretty much the first hour of our hike. Lots of houses made out of driftwood and chicken wire, lots of open sewage, lots of garbage, but the roads were okay. We were, of course, concerned about the kids. Alex had just turned 8 and Frankie just turned 6. And we had 3 7-hour days of nothing but walking for them. I have a recollection as a kid of going to the Milwaukee Zoo or the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry and spending the whole day there. I vaguely remember my feet hurting and whining a lot. But that was never really a whole day walking. We'd walk for an hour or two and then stop for an hour or two. Besides, we were always seeing cool things on these days. This was 7 hours a day for 3 days with nothing to see but the hills of Nepal. We assumed the kids would be a problem, so we arranged 2 extra Sherpa whose sole job would be to carry the kids. Our pre-planning proved to be prescient. Not 5 minutes outside of the mall offices where we picked up all the trekking gear, Frankie and Bethany were chasing each other along the streets when Frankie tripped and fell. She only cried a little, but when she got up to walk, she started limping. Of course, the limp lasted no more than a minute, at which point she determined she needed to be carried. She took one look at the Sherpa that offered to carry her and decided that she needed her mom to carry her. 15 minutes after that, with the noontime sun beating down on us and the temperature over 80, Alex turned to me and said, "I'm tired." So we've got roughly 20 and a half hours of walking left on this stupid family trek, and both kids are ready to call it quits. That was when I devised my plan. Okay, some may call it bribery, but to me it was a plan. I told Frankie and Alex that if they walked the whole time, no assistance from anyone, I would give them 200 Saudi riyals, roughly $50. Hey, you know what this stupid trip cost me? And if they could walk half the way, I would give them 100 Saudi riyals. Further, I proposed I would give a 10 riyal bonus if there was no fussing. This is your basic sucker bet. The kids have been receiving allowance now for about 2 years. They know the value of money and what money can get for them. Plus, they know that 200 is a lot of money. I, on the other hand, know that 21 hours of walking for little kids was about as likely as them flying to the moon. Mostly, I was hoping that they would make a valiant effort at walking part of it, and when they were tired, I could coax them on, letting them know that if they got carried anymore, they might lose the 100. And miraculously, it worked. Frankie wanted to be let down and said the first carrying didn't count. Her limp was magically gone. And Alex, mindful of the 20 real bonus, didn't mention the heat or his feet again. The minutes turned into hours and we trudged along. We crossed a long footbridge across the Trisuli River, and then we began the long, slow climb up the foothills of Pokhora. When I say foothills, from the airport to that day's camp, we climbed something like 2,000 feet. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but it's roughly equivalent to climbing up the Empire State Building twice. Still, it's not so noticeable when you stretch it out over 6 or 7 hours of walking. And the terrain was beautiful. In this particular area, you couldn't see any big mountains, but all around were these 3,000-foot hills, roughly from base to peak, what the Smoky Mountains are. But every hill was terraced with rice paddies cut into the side and descending all the way down the hills. In the valley were more rice paddies, and in every rice paddy was an old water buffalo pulling a wooden plow, with the farmer behind hitting him with a stick. The last half hour before lunch, 3 to 3:30, something like that, was almost straight up. I'm no He-Man, and I'm not afraid to admit at this point I was hot and my feet were very sore. Frankie had walked about half the way, and she had found a young Sherpa, 15 maybe, who she liked enough to let him carry her. Alex walked the whole way, as did Matthew and Bethany, but all had very tired feet. When at last we stopped for lunch under a broad tree overlooking the rice fields below, we were all pretty well done. Joanne complained about a stomach ache, but most of the rest of us were too sore, so we didn't pay much attention. Lunch was sardines, yak cheese, a salad, and French fries. The kids ate the fries and nothing else. We had been warned not to eat the vegetables, but as far as I was concerned, if the choice was sardine or eating the grass, I would have eaten the grass, and we were hungry. We rested for about 45 minutes and entertained ourselves by buying sticks from the local children. Yes, these industrious children living in a forest decided they could make money by selling walking sticks to tourists. You hear that, Karl Marx? In fact, their business must have been quite good because they could make change in 4 different currencies. Sorry, that's completely made up. Anyway, we all bought sticks. Joanne moaned throughout the lunch, and as we were packing to go, she even suggested she might like to quit this stupid trek. Still, she carried on. We walked about 100 yards away from our lunch spot, but straight up into a little village. Then the vomiting began. I counted 5 distinct stomach dumps by Joanne. The massive pizza feast we had the night before provided the volume, and the local villagers provided the crowd. I can't recall that much puking in one place since the Osmond brothers stopped touring. But in 15 minutes, it was done. And when I looked over, expecting to see Joanne's whole body turned inside out, she was smiling and said, "Boy, I feel great now." So on we went with Joanne singing about how good she felt and swearing it was the calzone she had the night before that had caused it. The curious thing for me was we marched into this little village. Joanne puked all over the village, and then we left. No attempt at cleanup, no thank you or I'm sorry. We just heaved and moved on. I'm not sure what those villagers were thinking, but what would we say if a group of Nepalese were marching down State Street and right in front of the Civic Center threw 3 buckets of barf on the street and then walked on if nothing happened? We still had 2 hours of hiking left, and at this point, it was more about survival. We kept climbing higher and higher on these damn hills, and we kept asking the guide where our camp was, and he kept saying, "Only half an hour more." The kids walked and talked with us, with each other, with the guides. As for the adults, I have no idea what the adults were doing. I was just putting one foot in front of the other and praying my feet didn't explode. We finally reached the top of the ridge of hills, and then it was just a matter of traversing the hills, passing a village, and then making the last little push of a hill, and we would be at campsite 1. The amazing thing is 100 yards below our campsite, there was a village. And even more amazing is that in that village, I could buy a Coke or a bottle of beer. Now you have to remember there are no roads here, only footpaths. And you also have to remember that this was like 5 hours off the main highway, up a couple thousand feet incline, that someone had to carry this beer. And not only that, but they charged the same for the beer as they did in Pokhora. I had to sit down the village elders and explain to them the cost of delivery and convenience markups and monopolistic profits. Where else were we going to go for beer? They just smiled at me and nodded their heads. The campsite was something unbelievable. We were on a flat plateau of this range of hills, like I said, some 3,000 feet up. A few miles beyond us were some mountains, jagged wood-covered peaks of maybe 10,000 feet. And then beyond them were the Annapurnas, snow-covered in 25,000 feet. Really unique and beautiful. The guide made us hot chocolate and tea, and we all rested our feet and watched them as they dug our toilet. At this point, Joe was feeling bad. He also ate the calzone and crawled into bed. We didn't see him again till the next morning. For the rest of us, they quickly made our dinner, our first of many meals of rice, chicken, and potatoes, and we were in bed asleep by 8. We had to be sure we had to be rested because we would have to be up at 6 the next morning and ready to face our big day. Okay, that's the story. Let me share with you the map real quick. Okay, and again, India. We started here, Jeddah, flew to Karachi, then flew to Kathmandu. Mount Everest is over this way, and Pokhora, the second city, is here. And our trek was up one of these ridges. And then you could see the wooded mountains, and beyond them, the Annapurnas. Okay, and finally, just have a few pictures to show you. There's Jilreen and Frankie and Bethany hiking along. There's the tree that Joanne puked around where we had our lunch. There's Frankie with her Sherpa as we're hiking through a village in Nepal. Notice the no doors and fairly primitive living. There's Frankie resting her feet as her Sherpa walked up a mountain. Look at his feet if you can. Flip-flops carrying a girl up a mountain. There's our campsite. The wooded mountains beyond, and then the Annapurna's in the distance. There's Alex and the rice fields behind him. There's Alex and Frankie in the little village. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. Day 4 tomorrow. Thanks for coming.